New York, United States, a city where dreams and nightmares coexist in a precarious balance. Among the imposing skyscrapers of Manhattan, Maxwell Tower stands out as a monument to ambition and corporate power, its 60 floors of glass and steel dominating the skyline like a beacon of capitalism in the 21st century. Subscribe right now and hit the bell. This story will leave you breathless and show you how karma can strike when you least expect it. Don't miss our next video, like and share. The headquarters of the Maxwell Group occupies the top 10 floors of this architectural colossus. Its logo, a stylized eagle in full flight, shines with its own light at the top of the facade, visible from various points in the city, a constant reminder of the reach and influence that the company has accumulated since its founding nearly 2 decades ago. If this story seems impactful, wait until you see what we'll publish next week. Subscribe now to not miss any of our justice stories and life lessons. Activate all notifications. On the top floor of this corporate fortress lies the office of Victor Maxwell, CEO and founder of Maxwell Group. At 48, Victor personifies the American business elite. Perfectly groomed gray hair, custom Italian suit, limited edition Swiss watch, and a presence that radiates authority and demands immediate deference. A Harvard graduate with an MBA from Wharton, he transformed a small technology startup into a digital media conglomerate valued at over $45 billion. Have you ever wondered how a single moment of arrogance can trigger consequences that no fortune can prevent? This story will show you how small interactions reveal our true character and how fate sometimes has an ironic way of delivering justice. Subscribe now and hit the bell for more stories that will make you reflect on power, privilege, and responsibility in our modern society. That Thursday morning, Victor arrived at his office at precisely 7:30, as was his custom. His Tesla Model S, driven by his personal chauffeur, had dropped him at the private entrance of the building, where the head of security greeted him with an almost imperceptible bow. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell." Victor merely nodded as he walked to his private elevator, absorbed in reviewing the latest emails on his cutting-edge smartphone. The elevator, programmed to respond only to his fingerprint, took him directly to the 60th floor without intermediate stops. As the doors opened, his executive assistant, Sarah Chen, awaited him with his perfectly prepared morning ritual: freshly made coffee, selected Ethiopian beans roasted that very morning, the Wall Street Journal, and a tablet with the overnight reports and the day's agenda. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell," Sarah greeted with professional efficiency. "The legal team is ready for the meeting about the data stream case." The lawyers from Baker McKenzie arrived early and are waiting in the main conference room. Victor took the coffee, taking a small sip before nodding with approval. "Any update on the assigned judge?" he asked as they walked together to his office. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, consulting her tablet. "The case has been assigned to Judge Anthony Jackson. He has a reputation for being rigorous but fair, especially in intellectual property and technology patent cases." Victor slightly furrowed his brow. "Jackson? Do we have any connection to him? Anything we can leverage?" Sarah maintained her professional expression, though a slight tension appeared in her eyes. "There are no known personal connections, sir. Our legal team has thoroughly investigated, and Judge Jackson has an impeccable record. Law degree from Yale, doctorate from Stanford, prosecutor for 9 years, and federal judge for the Southern District of New York for the past 12 years. And his background? Where does he come from exactly?" pressed Victor as they entered his spacious office. "Born in the Bronx, sir, to a middle-class African-American family. His father was a postal worker and his mother a high school teacher. He worked his way through college and law school on scholarships and part-time jobs. And his record of decisions? Does he lean toward big companies, or is he one of those people's defenders?" continued Victor as he sat behind his imposing mahogany desk. "His rulings are consistently based on the legal merits of each case, sir. He shows no particular bias toward any party. However, he is known for not tolerating delaying tactics or unethical behaviors in his courtroom." Victor made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "All judges have a price or a weak point. Tell our team to keep investigating. I want to know everything about him, his hobbies, his friends, his personal finances. This case is worth over $2 billion to us. We're not going to lose it because we weren't prepared." Sarah nodded without showing the discomfort she felt at these instructions. "Of course, sir. Would you like to review the latest financial reports before the meeting?" "Yes, but quickly. I don't want to keep Baker McKenzie waiting. They're expensive by the hour." As Sarah showed him the reports, Victor scanned the numbers with the speed and precision of a predator assessing its territory. The data stream case represented one of the biggest legal challenges in the history of Maxwell Group. A competitor was accusing them of having stolen patented technology to develop a new content distribution algorithm, technology that now formed the basis of government and corporate contracts worth billions. "The legal grounds are on our side," muttered Victor. "We developed that technology internally. It's just that those incompetents at Nextech didn't know how to commercialize it, and now they want a piece of our success." Sarah, who knew all the details of the case, knew that the reality was more complicated. There had been irregularities in the acquisition of certain information, but her job wasn't to question Victor Maxwell's decisions, but to execute them with maximum efficiency. "The meeting will start in 5 minutes, sir." Victor nodded, took the last sip of his coffee and adjusted his silk Italian tie before standing up. "Let's do this. And Sarah, I need to leave at 1:30 sharp. I have an important lunch with the senator." "It's noted, sir." The meeting with the lawyers from Baker McKenzie, one of the most prestigious firms in the United States, lasted almost 4 hours. Strategies, counter-strategies, witness statements, and technical experts who would testify about the originality of Maxwell Group's technological development were discussed. Jonathan Barker, the lead partner on the case, presented a detailed analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of their legal position. "The key is to demonstrate that our development team arrived at similar solutions independently," explained Jonathan, showing slides on the main screen displaying parallel research timelines. "We have internal documentation that supports an autonomous development process that began even before Nextech filed their patent." "And the emails that mention the technical details of their system?" Victor asked directly. Jonathan exchanged a brief but significant look with Michelle Park, the intellectual property specialist on the team. "That's our area of vulnerability," acknowledged Jonathan cautiously. "The emails between Rodriguez and Klein could be interpreted as prior knowledge of specific aspects of Nextech's technology. However, we'll argue that it was general knowledge in the industry, not specific proprietary information." "And if Nextech presents their former employee, Thompson, the one we hired 2 years ago," insisted Victor. "We're prepared for that," intervened Michelle. "His confidentiality agreement with Nextech had several loopholes we can exploit. Plus, any knowledge he might have brought with him would be protected as personal know-how, not as defined trade secrets." Victor nodded, pleased with the thoroughness of the analysis. "Good. And what do we know about the judge? How can we ensure he sees things our way?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, Jonathan spoke with measured care. "Mr. Maxwell, Judge Jackson is known for his incorruptible integrity. Any attempt at undue influence would be counterproductive and potentially disastrous. Our strategy must focus exclusively on the legal merits of our case." Victor stared at him, assessing the sincerity of his words. "You speak as if you've never suggested a favorable perspective to a judge, Jonathan." "I've practiced law for 30 years, Mr. Maxwell," replied Jonathan with professional dignity, "and I can assure you that there are judges with whom certain suggestions would be possible and others with whom they would be suicidal. Jackson unequivocally belongs to the second category." Victor held his gaze for a few more seconds, then nodded curtly. "I understand. Then we stick to the legal strategy, but I want it executed to perfection. No errors, no surprises." "Of course," confirmed Jonathan. "For tomorrow's preliminary hearing, we'll focus on discrediting the overly broad definition Nextech makes of their patent. We have solid jurisprudence from the Supreme Court and the Federal Circuit Court that supports our position." By the time the meeting ended, Victor was satisfied but tense. Despite the lawyer's assurances, he knew the case wasn't foolproof. It would largely depend on how Judge Jackson interpreted certain precedents and legal technicalities. As he left Maxwell Tower in his Tesla, Victor checked his watch. He had just enough time for a quick stop before his lunch with the senator. He needed to pick up a suit that he had sent to an exclusive dry cleaner for a charity gala that night. "James, take me to Elite Cleaners on 5th Avenue. It'll be quick." "Yes, sir," replied the chauffeur, directing the vehicle toward the upscale neighborhood. As the car advanced through the elegant streets of Manhattan, Victor reviewed messages on his phone. Among them was one from his daughter Sophia, a 22-year-old who, unlike her father, showed more interest in social causes than the business world. "Dad, can we talk about the foundation? I have ideas for the scholarship program that I want to share before the board meeting. Victor sighed. The Maxwell Foundation had been his late wife Catherine's idea, who had insisted that the family should give back to society a portion of their fortune. He had agreed primarily for public relations, but Sophia took the matter very seriously, to his constant irritation. He replied with a brief message. "Busy today. We'll talk at home tonight." The Tesla stopped in front of a small but elegant dry cleaner. James hurried to open the door for his boss. "Wait here," ordered Victor. "I won't be long." Elite Cleaners was known for serving the Manhattan elite with discreet and top-quality service. However, upon entering, Victor noticed something unusual. The owner, Mr. Peterson, wasn't behind the counter as usual. In his place was a middle-aged African-American man, impeccably dressed in a white shirt and tie, who greeted him with a professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you?" Victor, accustomed to being immediately recognized, slightly frowned. "I'm here to pick up a suit." "Maxwell. Victor Maxwell." The man consulted the computer system efficiently. "Of course, Mr. Maxwell, one moment, please." As the man headed to the back room, Victor observed the establishment with impatience. The dry cleaner was small but elegant, with an air of discretion and exclusivity that attracted high-level clients. Framed photographs showed celebrities and politicians shaking hands with Mr. Peterson, evidence of the establishment's prestige. When the employee returned, he brought a hanger covered with a fine fabric protective cover with the cleaner's logo. "Here you are, Mr. Maxwell. A Tom Ford, if I'm not mistaken. An exceptional piece." Victor nodded distractedly as he took the cover. "Where is Peterson?" "Mr. Peterson is on vacation this week. I'm Anthony Jackson, his brother-in-law. I'm helping with the family business." Victor barely registered the name, too busy checking his suit, which he had partially uncovered. Suddenly, his expression changed. "What is this?" he asked sharply, pointing to a tiny, almost imperceptible spot on the lapel. Anthony leaned in to examine the indicated point. "Let me see, sir." "This wasn't here when I brought it in," asserted Victor with growing irritation. "What kind of service are you offering while Peterson is away?" "I assure you, Mr. Maxwell, that we follow the same quality protocols. Let me check the intake records to see the condition in which the garment arrived." As Anthony consulted the computer, Victor looked at his watch repeatedly, his impatience increasing by the second. The lunch with the senator was crucial to secure certain government contracts. "I don't have time for this. The suit cost over $8,000 and now it's ruined." "Mr. Maxwell, according to our records, that small spot was already present when the garment was brought in. It's documented in the intake observations and was pointed out to your assistant when she brought in the suit." "That's absurd," snapped Victor. "Sarah would never have agreed to leave a spotted suit. This is clearly your negligence." The tension in the air was palpable, but Anthony maintained his professional composure. He had decades of experience dealing with difficult clients, first in his legal career and now occasionally in the family business. "I understand your frustration, sir. Let me offer you a solution. We can try a specialized treatment for that spot at no additional cost, of course." "And how long would that take?" "Approximately 24 hours to ensure the fabric isn't damaged." "Impossible. I need it for tonight." At that moment, the backroom door opened and a young man came out, also African-American, dressed in a shirt similar to Anthony's but with rolled-up sleeves. It was Marcus Jackson, Anthony's son, who was also helping with the business while finishing his law studies. "Is there a problem, Dad?" he asked, quickly assessing the situation. "Mr. Maxwell has a concern about a spot on his suit," explained Anthony calmly. Marcus approached to examine the garment. "It's a minimal spot, barely visible, but I understand the concern with such an exclusive piece." Victor, now completely irritated by the delay, made an abrupt gesture that caused a glass of water on the counter to spill over some documents, and worse, over a silk shirt waiting to be packaged. "Careful!" exclaimed Marcus, rushing to save the items. "It was an accident," said Victor without conviction or apology in his tone. Anthony and Marcus worked quickly to mitigate the damage, but the silk shirt, belonging to another customer, had been visibly affected. "I'm afraid this shirt has been damaged," said Anthony, maintaining his professional tone despite the tension. "It's a Brioni piece valued at around $200. "Not my problem," replied Victor, checking his watch again. "Your counter is poorly organized. I don't have time for this." "Mr. Maxwell," insisted Anthony with firmness but without losing his composure, The accident occurred due to your abrupt movement. As a company, we are responsible to our customer for this garment. I would ask you to cover the cost of the damage. It's $175 for the specialized cleaning it will require. $175? For a simple water stain? That's ridiculous, scoffed Victor. Chinese silk is extremely delicate, sir. Water can leave permanent marks if not treated properly and immediately. We need to send it to a specialist in Boston. Victor took out his wallet and extracted a $50 bill, throwing it on the counter with disdain. This is more than enough, and you're getting lucky. Marcus stepped forward, clearly indignant. Sir, that doesn't even cover half the cost. We're a family business with a reputation to maintain. Then you should maintain your premises better and not cause accidents, replied Victor coldly. And if you don't know how to recognize your VIP customers, perhaps you should reconsider whom you hire to attend the counter. The veiled insult did not go unnoticed. Anthony placed a hand on his son's shoulder, who was visibly containing his indignation. Mr. Maxwell, said Anthony with a dignity that sharply contrasted with Victor's arrogance, in this establishment, we value all our customers equally and offer them the same level of excellence. I would ask you to reconsider your position on the damage caused. It's not about the money, but about respect and responsibility. Respect is earned, replied Victor, picking up his suit, and some people never learn that lesson. With these words, he left the dry cleaner without looking back, leaving father and son in a silence charged with tension. Dad, you can't let people like him. Easy, Marcus, interrupted Anthony with serenity. There are many ways to impart lessons of respect. Some require time. He took out his mobile phone and made a call. Lisa, this is Anthony. I need to readjust my schedule for this afternoon. Yes, the entire calendar. Something important has come up. Marcus looked at his father with curiosity. Are you going to take legal action for this? Anthony smiled slightly. No, son. Justice sometimes arrives by unexpected paths. Let's take care of this shirt. Mr. Ferreira is a good customer and deserves our utmost attention. Meanwhile, Victor Maxwell continued his day without giving another thought to the incident at the dry cleaner. Lunch with the senator was productive, with conversations about future government contracts and favorable regulations for the technology sector. Victor moved in these circles with the ease of someone accustomed to power, cultivating strategic relationships with key figures in politics and business. The data stream project has national security implications, Senator, explained Victor as they shared a dessert. Our content distribution algorithm will protect government communications better than any existing system. Sounds promising, Victor, replied the senator, a man in his 50s with well-known political ambitions, although I've heard there's some legal controversy about it. Nothing serious, dismissed Victor with a gesture. A small company trying to capitalize on our success. The matter will be resolved soon in our favor. The senator nodded, though a shadow of doubt crossed his face. I hope so. The government can't afford scandals in contracts of this magnitude. I assure you there will be no problem, stated Victor with absolute confidence. We have the best lawyers and the case is solid. Upon returning to his office, Victor found Sarah waiting for him with several folders. How was lunch? She asked. Productive. The senator is on board, although slightly concerned about the data stream case. We need to resolve it quickly. Sarah nodded. About that, sir, I've received additional information about Judge Jackson that might interest you. Something we can use? Not exactly, replied Sarah, carefully choosing her words. Our investigators have confirmed his impeccable reputation. There are no financial, personal, or professional scandals. His lifestyle is modest for his income, and he dedicates part of his free time to teaching at the university and to pro bono projects for disadvantaged communities. Victor frowned. There must be something. Nobody is that perfect. The only notable thing is his family connection to a dry cleaning business on Fifth Avenue. Apparently he is married to the sister of the owner and occasionally helps with the business. It seems to be a family tradition he has maintained since his student years. Victor made a gesture of disinterest. A dry cleaner? I don't see how that helps us. Keep looking. The rest of the afternoon passed in meetings and calls. In the evening, Victor attended the charity gala wearing the suit he had picked up, the tiny spot completely forgotten. He moved through the event with the confidence of someone who knows they are one of the most powerful people in the room, exchanging greetings with politicians, businessmen, and celebrities. Victor, darling, how wonderful to see you, greeted Olivia Huntington. a socialite known for her influence in exclusive circles. "Have you met the new Supreme Court Justice? He's over there, with the Justice Ministers group. The new appointment." "No, I haven't had the pleasure yet." "You should approach him. They say he has a brilliant future in the judiciary. And you never know when you'll need friends in high places, right?" suggested Olivia, with a complicit smile. Victor returned the smile, appreciating the advice. "Always so wise, Olivia. Would you excuse me for a moment?" He headed toward the group Olivia had pointed out, composed of several prominent figures from the judicial and political world. Among them, he recognized the Justice Minister, whom he had met on several occasions. "Minister, good evening," greeted Victor with his usual charm. "Ah, Maxwell, we were just talking about technological innovation. Let me introduce you to our recent Supreme Court appointment, Justice Elena Rodriguez." An elegant woman in her 60s extended her hand. "Mr. Maxwell, I've heard a lot about you." "Only good things, I hope," replied Victor with a practiced smile. "Mostly about your business aggressiveness," replied the Justice with a polite but penetrating smile, "especially in the technology sector." "Innovation requires determination, Your Honor," responded Victor, quickly adapting to the tone of the conversation. "Without a doubt, although it also requires respect for others' intellectual property, don't you think?" The comment, delivered with a smile but loaded with intention, took Victor by surprise. Before he could respond, the Justice continued. "Speaking of innovation, I was commenting to the Minister about my colleague, Judge Jackson. His work on jurisprudence regarding content distribution algorithms is truly pioneering. Do you know him, Mr. Maxwell?" "Only by reputation," replied Victor, maintaining his composure. "I understand he is very rigorous." "He is one of our best jurists," affirmed the Justice. "Brilliant integrity personified and with a deep sense of justice. Personally, I consider him a model for the new generation of judges." "Sounds impressive," commented Victor, seeking to change the subject. "And what are your priorities in your new position, Your Honor?" The conversation continued in other directions, but Victor was left with an uncomfortable feeling. The specific mention of Jackson didn't seem casual, and even less so the reference to intellectual property. Upon returning home that night, to his 10,000-square-foot penthouse with views of Central Park, Victor poured himself an aged whiskey as he reflected on the day. The opulence surrounding him, contemporary art pieces valued in the millions, exclusive designer furniture, cutting-edge technology perfectly integrated into the decor, was the material testimony of his success. His daughter, Sophia, arrived while Victor was contemplating the lights of New York from his terrace. "Dad, can we talk now about the foundation?" asked the young woman, whose physical resemblance to her father contrasted with her much more modest and approachable attitude. "Sophia, it's been a long day. Can't it wait until tomorrow?" "The board meeting is the day after tomorrow, and I really think we should expand the scholarship program for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I have all the figures and the potential impact calculated." Victor sighed but gestured toward the sofa. "You have 10 minutes. Sophia sat down, opening her laptop enthusiastically. "I've been researching similar programs across the country, and the results are amazing. The social return on investment is—" "Sophia," interrupted Victor, "the foundation already donates millions each year. Why this obsession with expanding even more?" The young woman looked directly at her father. "Because we can do more, much more, and because it's the right thing to do. The right thing is to keep Maxwell Group strong and prosperous, which allows us to continue funding these initiatives of yours." "Initiatives that Mom would fully support," replied Sophia with gentleness but firmness. The mention of Catherine, who had passed away 3 years earlier, created a moment of silence between them. It had been she who had insisted on creating the Maxwell Foundation, arguing that their fortune carried a social responsibility. "Your mother had a heart too big for business," finally said Victor, with a mixture of affection and exasperation. "But it's fine. Show me your proposal." For the next 20 minutes, exceeding the original 10-minute limit, Sophia presented a detailed plan to expand educational scholarships to young people from immigrant communities and disadvantaged neighborhoods, with special emphasis on technology studies. "We're talking about just 7 million additional, Dad, a fraction of the quarterly profits of the group." Victor studied the numbers, impressed despite himself by the meticulousness of his daughter's analysis. "Not bad. We'll present this to the board, but I'm not promising anything." Sophia's smile lit up her face. "Thanks, Dad. I assure you, you won't regret it." "I'm already regretting it," muttered Victor, but a slight smile betrayed a certain paternal pride. Despite their differences, he recognized in his daughter the same determination he himself possessed, although directed at very different causes. After Sophia's departure, Victor reviewed some more emails before going to bed. Among them, one from Sarah reminded him of the preliminary hearing of the data stream case, scheduled for the following morning. She attached a summary of the key points prepared by the legal team. Victor reviewed it distractedly, trusting in the preparation of his lawyers. His mind was already anticipating victory in this case, visualizing the new government contracts that would follow and the international expansion of the data stream system. A small legal obstacle wouldn't stop the inexorable advance of Maxwell Group. The next morning, as he reviewed the financial headlines on his iPad during breakfast, a notification from Sarah appeared on his screen. Reminder: first preliminary hearing of the data stream case today at 10 p.m. Car ready at 9:15. Victor smiled with satisfaction. His lawyers were well prepared, and he had full confidence that this first encounter would set the tone for the entire process. Maxwell Group dictating the terms, as always. At 9:45, Victor entered the imposing building of the Southern District Federal Court of New York, flanked by a team of 5 lawyers from Baker McKenzie, all carrying fine leather briefcases filled with meticulously prepared documents. Their presence commanded respect, and the glances from other lawyers and litigants in the courthouse corridors confirmed it. As they approached the designated courtroom, he noticed Rachel Thompson, Nextech's lead attorney, quietly conversing with her associates. She was a respected litigator, but Victor was sure that the legal team he had hired, with its virtually unlimited budget, surpassed her in every aspect. "Good morning, Rachel," he greeted with a calculated smile. "I hope you're prepared for a long battle." Rachel, a woman in her 50s with a serene presence that concealed an extremely sharp legal mind, returned the smile without showing intimidation. "Good morning, Victor. I'm always prepared to defend the truth, no matter how long it takes." Before he could respond, the court clerk appeared at the door of the courtroom. "Case Nextech versus Maxwell Group. The parties may enter." The courtroom was modern but solemn, with the gravity that corresponded to decisions affecting billions of dollars and the future of entire companies. Victor and his team positioned themselves on one side, while Rachel and hers occupied the other. The room was surprisingly full. The case had attracted considerable attention in business and technology circles. "All rise," announced the clerk. "The Honorable Anthony Jackson, United States District Judge for the Southern District of New York, presiding." A man entered from a side door and approached the bench. Victor felt the blood draining from his face as he recognized the man he had treated with disdain the day before at the dry cleaner. Judge Jackson, now dressed in the black robe that denoted his judicial authority, took his seat with serene dignity. His eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on Victor before consulting the documents before him. "Please be seated," he indicated with a clear and firm voice. As everyone sat down, Victor leaned toward Jonathan Barker, his lead attorney. "That's the man from the dry cleaner," he whispered urgently. "The one who wanted me to pay for the shirt." Jonathan looked at him in confusion. "What dry cleaner? What are you talking about, Mr. Maxwell?" "Yesterday on Fifth Avenue. This judge was working there. We had a disagreement." Jonathan's expression changed from confusion to contained alarm. "Are you sure?" "Completely." Before they could continue their conversation, Judge Jackson spoke. "We will begin with the presentation of initial positions. Counselor Thompson, as representative of the plaintiff, you have the floor." Rachel stood up and began to present Nextech's case, arguing with precision how the content distribution algorithm originally developed by her client had been improperly appropriated by Maxwell Group. "Your Honor, the facts are clear and are supported by substantial documentary evidence," explained Rachel. "Nextech developed and patented its content distribution algorithm after years of research and millions of dollars invested. Less than 6 months after one of their principal engineers, Mr. David Thompson, was hired by Maxwell Group, this company announced a surprisingly similar system with the same algorithms and security architecture. Rachel proceeded to show technical diagrams and timelines on the courtroom screen, highlighting the similarities between both systems and the temporal coincidence. Additionally, Your Honor, we have discovered internal communications from Maxwell Group that demonstrate detailed knowledge of our patented technology before it was publicly disclosed. These communications, which we will present as evidence, clearly show that this was not a parallel and independent development, but a deliberate appropriation of protected intellectual property. As he listened, Victor frantically scribbled a note to Jonathan. "We need to request the judge's recusal immediately. Obvious conflict of interest." Jonathan read the note and slightly shook his head, writing in response, "We need valid legal grounds. A casual encounter outside the court is not sufficient. It wasn't casual. It's his family business. He has personal animosity against me because of the incident." Jonathan appeared increasingly concerned as Rachel continued her presentation, which was being received with attention by Judge Jackson, who occasionally asked incisive questions that demonstrated his deep understanding of the technology in dispute. "Can the plaintiff demonstrate that these specific elements of their technology were not known in the state-of-the-art prior to the patent application?" asked the judge at one point. "Absolutely, Your Honor," replied Rachel. "We will present reports from independent experts that confirm the novelty and originality of our solution. Additionally, the patent process itself included an exhaustive examination that verified these aspects." When Rachel finished her initial 45-minute presentation, the judge addressed the defense team. "Counselor Barker, your turn." Jonathan stood up, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, but maintaining his professionalism. "Your Honor, before proceeding with our presentation, the defense would like to raise a procedural issue." "Go ahead," grunted Judge Jackson, his expression neutral and impartial. "The defense respectfully requests that Your Honor consider recusing himself from this case due to a potential conflict of interest." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Jackson raised an eyebrow, the only visible sign of his reaction. "And what would that conflict be, Counselor?" Jonathan briefly looked at Victor, who nodded firmly before continuing. "Your Honor, it has come to our attention that you and my client, Mr. Victor Maxwell, had a personal interaction outside this court that could compromise the impartiality necessary for this case. Please specify the nature of that interaction." Jonathan swallowed, aware that he was on delicate ground. "A disagreement at a family commercial establishment, occurring just yesterday." Judge Jackson removed his glasses and looked directly at Victor for the first time. "Are you referring to an incident at Elite Cleaners, Mr. Maxwell?" The courtroom fell into complete silence as all eyes turned toward Victor, who was forced to respond. "Yes, Your Honor." "For the record," continued the judge with a neutral tone, "Elite Cleaners is owned by my brother-in-law, James Peterson. I occasionally help with the family business during my free hours. It's a tradition I maintain from my student years, when that work helped finance my education." He paused before continuing. "Mr. Maxwell, could you specifically articulate how this casual encounter would constitute a conflict that would prevent me from judging this case with impartiality?" All eyes were now fixed on Victor, who felt increasingly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, I consider that the incident demonstrates a personal animosity that could affect your decision. The incident in which you spilled water on another customer's garment, valued at nearly $1,200, and refused to cover the full cost of the specialized cleaning, offering only $50 of the $175 requested." Victor shifted in his seat. "That is not exactly my characterization of the facts, Your Honor." "And what would your characterization be, Mr. Maxwell?" "A misunderstanding," he replied tersely. Judge Jackson nodded slowly. "I understand. Well, let me be clear. The incident to which you refer has absolutely no influence on my ability to decide this case with impartiality. I will evaluate the arguments and evidence exclusively according to their legal merits, as I have done throughout my entire judicial career." He looked around the courtroom before continuing. "The motion for recusal is denied. We will proceed with the defense's presentation. Counselor Barker, when you're ready." Jonathan stood up, visibly relieved to be able to return to solid legal ground. As he presented Maxwell Group's arguments, Victor observed Judge Jackson, looking for any sign of partiality or animosity. To his frustration, the magistrate maintained impeccable objectivity, asking equally incisive questions to both parties and showing a deep knowledge of intellectual property legislation and content distribution technology. "Our client developed its technology completely independently," argued Jonathan. "The similarities are due to both companies facing the same technical challenges, and the solutions available within the current state-of-the-art are limited. It's a classic case of parallel development, not misappropriation." Judge Jackson listened attentively, taking detailed notes. "Can the defense then explain the internal communications mentioned by the plaintiff which apparently show prior knowledge of non-public technical details. Of course, Your Honor. Those communications, which we will examine in detail during the trial, refer to general concepts widely discussed in academic conferences and scientific publications. They do not constitute knowledge of the specific implementation patented by Nextech. The hearing continued for 3 more hours, with both parties presenting their preliminary arguments and responding to the judge's penetrating questions. By the time it concluded, Victor had to admit, much to his chagrin, that Judge Jackson seemed to be conducting the process with absolute professionalism, without showing the slightest sign of the resentment he had feared. When the preliminary hearing concluded, Judge Jackson established a calendar for the presentation of evidence and testimony and set the date for the next session. This court expects the highest level of professionalism and ethics from all parties involved. Any attempt to manipulate the process or pressure witnesses will be treated with the utmost severity. The session is adjourned. As he left the courtroom, Victor was visibly tense. In the hallway, Jonathan and the rest of the legal team surrounded him, speaking in low, urgent voices. "Mr. Maxwell, with all due respect, that recusal motion was a strategic error. It has only served to antagonize the judge," commented Jonathan, "and to publicly expose behavior that doesn't favor our image," added Michelle Park, another of the lawyers, with tact but firmness. At that moment, Rachel Thompson passed by with her team, a slight smile of satisfaction on her lips. "Interesting start, Victor. Perhaps now you'd be more willing to consider an out-of-court settlement." "Never," replied Victor dryly. "This case will be decided in the courts." Once in his car, Victor furiously called Sarah. "I need all possible information about Judge Jackson. Everything. His complete history, his family connections, his weak points. And I want options for getting a different judge." "Of course, sir," replied Sarah, without mentioning that she had already provided a complete dossier on the judge, which Victor apparently hadn't read carefully. "I'll have it ready for when you return to the office." Back at Maxwell Tower, Victor met with his expanded legal team for damage assessment and strategic planning. The consensus was clear. The case would have to be won on its legal merits, as any additional attempt to challenge the judge would only harm their position. "Judge Jackson has an impeccable reputation," explained Jonathan. "We've thoroughly investigated, and there's nothing to suggest partiality or inappropriate conduct in his entire career. In fact, he has ruled both for and against large corporations, based strictly on the interpretation of the law." "Everyone has a price or a weakness," insisted Victor. Michelle Park, normally the most reserved on the team, intervened with firmness. "Mr. Maxwell, I must warn you in the clearest possible terms against any attempt to unduly influence the judge. Not only would it be illegal, but it could result in devastating consequences for the case and for Maxwell Group." "I'm not suggesting anything illegal," defended Victor. "I just want every possible advantage." "The best advantage at this moment would be to focus on the legal arguments and the evidence," replied Jonathan. "We have a solid case regarding the originality of our technological development. We should focus on that." Victor finally nodded, although he didn't seem completely convinced. "Fine. Proceed with preparing the defense. But I want daily updates on any development, however minimal." Over the following weeks, the case advanced with the presentation of evidence, expert testimony, and legal arguments from both parties. To Victor's frustration, Judge Jackson directed the process with scrupulous impartiality, showing no favoritism toward either party. The discovery phase revealed evidence that proved more problematic than Victor had anticipated. The internal emails between several Maxwell Group executives, including some from Victor himself, contained explicit references to leveraging Thompson's knowledge about Project Nexus, the code name for Nextech's content distribution system. In a tense meeting at Maxwell Tower, Jonathan presented the updated case assessment. "The situation is more complicated than we initially thought, Mr. Maxwell. The documentary evidence isn't completely in our favor." "Are you saying we're going to lose?" Victor asked directly. Jonathan exchanged glances with Michelle and the other lawyers before responding. "I'm saying we should seriously consider an out-of-court settlement. The chances of a completely favorable ruling are limited." "What chances exactly?" "At this moment, based on the available evidence and the development of the case so far, I would estimate a 30% chance of winning completely. There's a 40% probability of a partially favorable ruling that would still allow us to commercialize the technology. but with substantial payments to Nextech and a 30% risk of losing entirely. Victor stood up and walked to the window, contemplating the New York skyline as he processed this information. The data stream case was crucial for the future of Maxwell Group. The government contracts already signed depended on this technology, and the financial projections for the next 5 years assumed the income derived from it. What would be the terms of a potential agreement? He finally asked. Based on preliminary conversations with Rachel Thompson, Nextech would be willing to grant an exclusive license for their technology in exchange for royalty payments of 15% and a public acknowledgement of their intellectual property. 15%? Exclaimed Victor, turning around. That's extortion. Offer them 7. Mr. Maxwell, with all due respect, we are not in a position to negotiate from a position of strength. If the case continues its current course, we could face not only higher royalties by judicial decision, but also punitive damages and severe restrictions on our ability to commercialize the technology. Victor returned to his seat, visibly displeased. Fine, I authorize negotiations for an agreement, but I want you to start at 9% and try to stay below 12%, and no public acknowledgements of intellectual property. We can accept a joint statement about technological collaboration or something similar. Jonathan nodded, although his doubts about the viability of these terms were evident. We will do our best. While the legal team prepared to initiate formal negotiations with Nextech, Victor faced another challenge at home. His daughter Sophia had convened a special meeting of the Maxwell Foundation's board to discuss a proposal she had been developing for months. It's a comprehensive program of scholarships and support for young people from immigrant communities and disadvantaged neighborhoods of New York, explained Sophia enthusiastically to the board, composed of Victor, 2 trusted Maxwell Group executives, and 3 respected figures from the academic and social sphere. It would not only provide education in cutting-edge technology, but also mentoring, professional internships, and startup support. Sounds ambitious, commented one of the academics, clearly impressed. What would be the necessary budget? $15 million for the first 3 years, replied Sophia without hesitation, with potential for partial self-sustainability from the 4th year through minority stakes in successful startups emerging from the program. Victor, who had remained silent during the presentation, finally intervened. Sophia, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but that would almost triple the Foundation's current budget. In the current economic climate, with the challenges facing Maxwell Group, it's not the time for such aggressive expansions. Sophia looked directly at her father. Dad, Maxwell Group reported record profits last quarter, and this program would generate a tangible return, both in social terms and eventually financial. Profits fluctuate, and we have responsibilities to our shareholders, replied Victor, aware that he wasn't mentioning the potential costs of the data stream litigation. Besides, the Foundation already has established programs that require continuity. The tension between father and daughter was palpable. The other board members observed the exchange with discomfort. I propose a compromise, finally suggested one of the academics, Dr. Michael Chen, a respected economist. We could approve a pilot phase of the program with a reduced budget of $5 million for the first year and evaluate the results before committing to the full program. Sophia considered the proposal. That would allow us to demonstrate the concept, although it would limit the initial scope. It seems reasonable to me, conceded Victor, seeing an elegant way out of the confrontation. Let's put it to a vote. The compromise proposal was unanimously approved. At the conclusion of the meeting, as the other board members were leaving, Sophia approached her father. Thanks for supporting the pilot, Dad. I know you're not completely convinced, but I promise you it will prove its worth. Victor studied his daughter with a mixture of pride and exasperation. You have the same stubbornness as your mother. Just make sure this project has tangible results. Philanthropy without measurable impact is just an exercise in vanity. The impact will be real, assured Sophia with conviction, and it will serve for something more than improving the corporate image of the group. The slight barb did not go unnoticed by Victor, but he decided to let it pass. We'll see. Keep me informed about the development. That night, in the solitude of his private office at home, Victor was reviewing the latest financial reports of Maxwell Group when his phone rang. It was Jonathan Barker. Mr. Maxwell, we have news about the negotiations with Nextech. I'm listening. They've rejected our initial offer of 9%. Their counteroffer is 14% royalties, a one-time payment of $75 million for past use of the technology, and a joint statement where we acknowledge that our technology incorporates elements originally developed by Nextech. Victor clenched his fist in frustration. It's still unacceptable. Mr. Maxwell, I must insist that we seriously consider this offer. The risks of continuing the litigation are— What is unacceptable, interrupted Victor, is for Maxwell Group to appear as an intellectual property thief. I'd rather risk a full trial. With all due respect, persisted Jonathan, Judge Jackson has demonstrated a deep knowledge of the subject matter and a meticulousness that doesn't play in our favor given the existing documentary evidence. If we lose the case, the consequences would be much more severe than this agreement. There was a long silence as Victor considered his options. Finally, he sighed heavily. We hired Thompson specifically for his knowledge of Project Nexus. We knew it then, and we know it now. The question is whether Judge Jackson will rule based strictly on legal technicalities or on the underlying reality. Judges like Jackson tend to focus on both aspects, sir, replied Jonathan cautiously. His reputation for integrity means he won't ignore clear evidence of intellectual appropriation, no matter how technically we present it. Another long silence. Counteroffer. 12% royalties, $50 million one-time payment, and a statement that mentions technological collaboration, but without explicit admission of appropriation. That's my final offer. I'll communicate it to Rachel immediately, promised Jonathan. The next day, as Victor was preparing for an important video conference with international investors, Sarah entered his office with a concerned expression. Mr. Maxwell, something unexpected has occurred. Judge Jackson has convened a special hearing for this afternoon. Apparently, new evidence has emerged in the data stream case. What evidence? Asked Victor, alarmed. It's not specified in the notification. Jonathan is already on his way to the office to discuss it. When Jonathan arrived, his grave expression confirmed Victor's concerns. Apparently, Nextech has gained access to additional internal communications that were not included in our initial discovery, explained Jonathan. I don't have specific details, but Rachel hinted that it is significant material. How the hell did they get that? Demanded Victor. I don't know with certainty, but there are rumors that a former employee from our technology department has provided information, possibly someone disgruntled with their departure from the company. Victor hit the desk in frustration. Didn't they all sign confidentiality agreements? Yes, but that doesn't physically prevent someone from leaking information. It only gives us a legal basis for subsequent actions against them. This changes our negotiating position, doesn't it? Jonathan nodded gravely. Significantly, I'm afraid. Without knowing exactly what new evidence they have, we'd be negotiating blindly. The special hearing was scheduled for 4 p.m. Victor and his legal team arrived at the court, with sufficient time for a prior meeting, but the atmosphere was tense. At 4 sharp, everyone took their places in the courtroom. Judge Jackson entered, and the session formally began. This hearing has been convened to consider new evidence presented by the plaintiff. Counselor Thompson, proceed. Rachel stood up, her expression serene but determined. Thank you, Your Honor. We have received documentation that conclusively demonstrates that Maxwell Group was not only aware of the specific details of our patented technology, but implemented a deliberate plan to appropriate it. Rachel activated the main screen of the courtroom, showing what appeared to be an internal Maxwell Group presentation, titled Project Phoenix, Integration of Nexus Technology. This document, dated 3 months before the public announcement of the data stream system by Maxwell Group, specifically details how the company planned to absorb and reverse engineer Nextech's technology, which they internally referred to as Nexus, to avoid license payments, and present it as their own development. Victor felt his blood run cold. He recognized that presentation. He himself had approved the project, although he had been careful not to leave a written trace of his authorization. Additionally, continued Rachel, we have emails from Mr. Maxwell himself, instructing his team to ensure that no documentary trace remains of the original source of the technology and that any similarity can be attributed to parallel development. The emails appeared on the screen, with Victor's name clearly visible as the sender. Judge Jackson studied the documents with an impassive expression, although his eyes narrowed slightly. Can the plaintiff explain how they obtained this evidence, which apparently was not included in the initial discovery? Yes, Your Honor. These documents were recently provided by a former Maxwell Group employee, Kevin Wright, who worked in the legal department and had access to these files. Mr. Wright left the company 3 months ago and only recently realized the relevance of these documents to our case. And why weren't they included in Maxwell Group's discovery response? Asked the judge, now directing his gaze toward Jonathan Barker. Jonathan stood up, visibly uncomfortable. Your Honor, we have no knowledge of these specific documents. We request time to verify their authenticity and the context in which they were created. Granted, replied the judge. The defense will have 48 hours to examine this new evidence and present its response. However, if these documents prove to be authentic, they represent a serious breach of discovery obligations. The hearing quickly concluded after that. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Victor confronted Jonathan. Those documents should have been destroyed, he hissed. Who the hell is Kevin Wright, and why did he have access to those emails? He was a junior associate in the legal department, temporarily assigned to the data stream project, replied Jonathan in a low voice. As for why he had access, it seems that someone didn't follow the information compartmentalization protocols we recommended. The reality of the situation settled heavily on Victor. The documents were authentic, and now they formed part of the judicial record. The case, which was already difficult, had become almost impossible to win. We need a settlement now, he finally decided, before this becomes public and affects not just the case, but the entire reputation of the group. Rachel will be in a position to demand much tougher terms now, warned Jonathan. I know. Accept whatever is necessary to bury this quickly and find out who else knew about these documents and didn't eliminate them as ordered. Back at Maxwell Tower, Victor convened an emergency meeting with his closest executive team. He explained the situation in frank terms, knowing he would need their support to handle the financial and reputational consequences. We're going to reach a settlement with Nextech, he announced. It will be costly but less damaging than losing the case and facing the full public repercussions. How much are we talking about? Asked Mark Anderson, the chief financial officer. We don't know for certain yet, but prepare for royalties of at least 20%, a one-time payment of possibly $100 million, and some type of public admission. A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Angela Torres, the communications director, spoke. We'll need a carefully orchestrated strategy to minimize the reputational damage. I suggest framing this as an amicable resolution and a strategic alliance with Nextech. Do whatever is necessary, authorized Victor. But we need to contain this. Over the next 48 hours, the legal teams of both companies maintained intense negotiations. As Jonathan had anticipated, Nextech's position had strengthened considerably with the new evidence. Their demands were substantially higher than before. Finally, an agreement was reached. Royalties of 22%, a one-time payment of $120 million, and a joint statement where Maxwell Group acknowledged that its data stream system incorporated patented technology developed by Nextech and expressed its regret for any confusion about the origin of the innovation. It was a significant blow, both financially and reputationally, but Victor knew it was preferable to the alternatives. A complete judicial ruling would have been even more costly and damaging. The day before the formal signing of the agreement, Victor decided to take a walk alone through Central Park, seeking some perspective. The events of the past few weeks had left him with an unfamiliar feeling of vulnerability. The data stream case had been on the verge of becoming a complete disaster, saved only by a costly agreement, and it had all begun with that seemingly trivial incident at a dry cleaner. As he walked along the park paths, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but he decided to answer anyway. Yes? Mr. Maxwell, this is Anthony Jackson. Victor stopped in his tracks. Judge Jackson, how did you get my personal number? That's not important, replied the calm voice on the other end of the line. What matters is that I understand you've reached an agreement with Nextech. That's correct. The case will no longer require judicial intervention. I'm glad to hear it. Justice can arrive by many paths, Mr. Maxwell. Sometimes through the courts, sometimes through recognizing our mistakes and rectifying them. There was a moment of silence before Victor responded. Are you calling to give me a moral lesson, Judge? Not at all. I just thought you'd be interested to know that the shirt that was damaged at the dry cleaner has been completely restored. The specialist in Boston did an exceptional job. Not a trace of the stain remains. Victor frowned, confused by this turn in the conversation. I don't understand why you're telling me this, because sometimes, Mr. Maxwell, What seems irreparably damaged can be restored with proper care and necessary expertise, whether it's a silk shirt or a business reputation. Are you suggesting that you knew about the documents before they were presented? That you somehow influenced the case? Asked Victor, feeling a mixture of indignation and alarm. I'm suggesting that life has curious ways of teaching us lessons, replied the judge calmly. The shirt belonged, by the way, to the Justice Minister, a gift from his wife for their anniversary. He values that garment highly, not for its cost, but for what it represents. Victor felt a chill run down his spine. Was it possible that everything, the case, the leaked documents, even the assignment of the judge, had been part of some elaborate plan? No, it was too fantastic. And yet, Judge Jackson, what is the real purpose of this call? I simply wanted to inform you that although our professional paths have separated with the resolution of the case, the family business will always be open for you if you need dry cleaning services in the future. All customers are important to us, Mr. Maxwell. All deserve the same respect regardless of who they are. Before Victor could respond, the call ended. He stood there in the middle of the park, with the phone still in his hand, feeling as if the universe had just given him a lesson he would never forget. A week later, the agreement with Nextech had been formalized and publicly announced. As expected, there was some turbulence in the financial markets, with Maxwell Group shares falling by 8% before stabilizing. The specialized media had covered the story, although the strategic alliance communication approach had helped mitigate some of the reputational damage. In his office at Maxwell Tower, Victor received his daughter Sophia, who had requested an urgent meeting. "Dad, I need to talk to you about the Foundation's pilot program," began Sophia, unusually serious. "Is there a problem with the funding?" "No, quite the opposite. I've received an offer of additional funding from Nextech." Victor straightened in his chair. "What?" "Their CEO, Maria Roberts, contacted me personally. They're impressed with the program and want to contribute $5 million additional dollars, matching our investment." "And what do they want in return?" asked Victor, immediately suspicious. "Nothing tangible, just for the program to carry the name of both foundations, ours and theirs, and for us to consider giving priority to young people from immigrant communities, especially those of Asian and Latino origin." Victor remained silent for a moment, processing this information. "Have you spoken with Maria Roberts about our recent agreement?" "Briefly. She mentioned that she hoped it would mark the beginning of a more constructive relationship between both companies." "And you think this is sincere? Not a way to rub salt in the wound?" Sophia considered the question seriously. "I met her in person, Dad. She seems sincere. Besides, their foundation has an impressive track record of successful educational programs. We could learn from their experience." Victor stood up and walked to the window, observing New York from the heights of Maxwell Tower. Recent events had forced him to re-evaluate many of his assumptions and methods. "You know, Sophia, your mother always said that sometimes what seems like a failure can be the beginning of something better." "I remember," replied Sophia, with a nostalgic smile. "It was her way of telling me to learn from my mistakes." Victor turned to his daughter. "Accept Nextech's offer and schedule a lunch with Maria Roberts. I'd like to meet her personally." The surprise on Sophia's face was evident. "Are you sure? 2 weeks ago you were calling them incompetent opportunists." "People can change their minds, daughter. Sometimes they need a lesson in humility." 2 days later, as Victor was preparing to leave the office, he decided to do something he hadn't done in years: take the subway. He left his Tesla in the garage and descended into the bowels of New York, mixing with the common people he normally only saw from a distance. In the subway car, he observed the people around him: tired office workers returning home, students with backpacks full of books, immigrant workers who kept the city functioning with their incessant labor. At one of the stations, a man entered and sat across from him. It was Anthony Jackson without his judge's robe, dressed like any other citizen. Their gazes crossed, and for a moment, Victor considered pretending he hadn't recognized him. But something in him had changed. "Judge Jackson," he greeted with a slight nod. "Mr. Maxwell," replied the judge, equally sober. "What a surprise to see you on the subway." "I'm exploring different perspectives," admitted Victor. Anthony smiled slightly. "A healthy practice. Seeing the world from different angles helps us understand it better." "Where are you headed?" asked Victor, surprising himself by initiating casual conversation. "To the dry cleaner," replied Anthony. "My nephew is sick, so I'm covering his shift this afternoon." Victor nodded, reflecting on this dual life. Respected judge by day, dry cleaning worker in the afternoons when the family needed him. "Can I ask you something, Judge Jackson?" "Of course." "Would you have ruled against us if the case had continued?" Anthony considered the question carefully. "I would have ruled based exclusively on the evidence and the law, Mr. Maxwell, as I always do. Even after our encounter at the dry cleaner." "Especially after that encounter," replied Anthony, "because it was then that I understood the importance of demonstrating that justice is truly blind, that it treats the powerful and the humble equally." The subway stopped at a station and Anthony rose. "This is my stop." Before leaving, he turned to Victor one last time. "By the way, we still have your suit at the dry cleaner. The right sleeve needed a small repair. It will be ready tomorrow if you'd like to pick it up." "I will," replied Victor, surprising himself again. "And this time I'll pay the full price." Anthony smiled and exited the car. The doors closed and the subway continued on its way, carrying Victor Maxwell toward a future that, for the first time in a long time, didn't seem as predictable as he had always assumed. Have you ever judged someone based solely on their appearance or social position? Have you treated with disdain people you consider inferior, without knowing the power or influence they might actually have in your life? This story reminds us that respect shouldn't depend on status and that our actions, even seemingly insignificant ones, can have unexpected consequences. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more content that will make you reflect on power, privilege, and justice in the modern world. And remember, sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. 5 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Bryant Park as Victor Maxwell sat on a bench, watching people go about their day. At 53, he looked different than he had 5 years ago. Not just the additional lines on his face or the slightly more casual attire, but something more fundamental in his bearing. The aggressive edge that had once defined him had softened into something more contemplative. He checked his watch. He was early for his appointment, deliberately so. These quiet moments of observation had become important to him over the years, a practice that began as a self-imposed exercise in humility and gradually evolved into genuine appreciation for the diverse tapestry of human life that surrounded him. "Mr. Maxwell." Victor looked up to see a young woman in her early 20s, clutching a notebook, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Yes, that's me," he replied, gesturing to the empty space beside him. "You must be Amara. Please have a seat." Amara Patel sat down, setting up a small recording device between them. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Mr. Maxwell. As I mentioned in my email, it's for my thesis on corporate ethics and transformation." "Happy to help," Victor said, "though I'm not sure how much insight I can offer that isn't already covered in the dozens of business school case studies about me." She smiled. "That's precisely why I wanted to speak with you directly. The case studies analyze what happened, but I'm more interested in how it changed you, the human element behind the corporate narrative." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. Where would you like to begin?" "Perhaps with where you are now," Amara suggested. "The Victor Maxwell of today seems very different from the one described in the business press 5 years ago. What are you focused on these days?" "I divide my time between 3 main areas," Victor explained. "I serve on the board of the Maxwell Foundation, which my daughter Sophia runs brilliantly. I teach a seminar on ethical leadership at Columbia Business School, and I consult with companies on integrating ethical practices into their corporate structures, though I'm selective about which clients I take on." "Not running a major corporation anymore?" Victor chuckled. "No. After the Nextech settlement, I stepped down as CEO of Maxwell Group. It was technically voluntary, though the board made it clear they preferred new leadership. I remained on the board for another year to ease the transition, then fully divested my shares." "Was that difficult?" Amara asked. "Leaving the company you founded?" "Surprisingly, no," Victor admitted. "By that point, I was ready for a change. The data stream case was a wake-up call in many ways. It forced me to confront aspects of myself and my leadership that I'd been unwilling to examine." Amara consulted her notes. "Your settlement with Nextech was widely covered in the business press, but the story about Judge Jackson and the dry cleaner only emerged later. Some people question whether it really happened that way." Victor smiled. "It happened exactly that way. Sometimes reality delivers more perfect narrative arcs than fiction ever could. My encounter with Anthony, Judge Jackson, at Elite Cleaners was the catalyst for everything that followed, though I certainly didn't recognize it at the time. Have you stayed in touch with him? We're not close friends, but yes, we've maintained a relationship of mutual respect. He retired from the bench 2 years ago and now focuses on teaching and mentoring young lawyers from underrepresented backgrounds. We occasionally speak at the same events or serve on the same panels about ethics and justice. And the infamous silk shirt that started it all? Amara asked with a hint of amusement. Victor laughed. I actually ended up paying for its restoration, and when I learned it belonged to the Justice Minister, I sent him a personal apology along with a donation to his favorite charity. He was gracious enough to accept both. Amara nodded, making notes. The Maxwell Next Tech Education Initiative has received considerable attention for its success rate with students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Did you anticipate that the partnership would be so successful? Not initially, Victor admitted. That was Sophia's vision, not mine. I was skeptical about collaborating with a company we had been locked in bitter litigation with just months earlier. But Maria Roberts, Nextech's CEO, proved to be an exceptional partner. Their expertise in educational technology complemented our resources and reach. The program has now helped over 5,000 students, correct? Yes, with an 87% college completion rate and impressive career placement statistics. Many graduates have gone on to found their own tech startups, some of which the foundation has invested in. It's become a virtuous cycle. Amara shifted to a more personal line of questioning. In your Columbia seminar, you often speak about the arrogance trap. Could you explain what you mean by that? Victor was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Success, especially early and dramatic success, can create a dangerous form of arrogance. You begin to believe that your success is entirely due to your superior abilities, rather than acknowledging the role of privilege, opportunity, and often sheer luck. This arrogance blinds you to your weaknesses and limitations. You stop listening to contrary viewpoints. You dismiss those you perceive as beneath you, not realizing that everyone has value and insights to offer. He paused, looking out at the park. In my case, that arrogance led me to believe I was above the rules, that laws protecting intellectual property were inconvenient obstacles rather than necessary protections. It led me to treat people like the cleaning staff or service workers as invisible or unimportant. And ultimately it brought about my downfall. Was there a specific moment when you realized you needed to change? Amara asked. There were several, Victor replied. The courtroom revelation, of course, seeing Judge Jackson on the bench and realizing he was the same man I had treated so dismissively. The devastating evidence presentation that exposed our intellectual property theft. But perhaps the most profound moment came later, during that conversation with Anthony on the subway. What happened? He asked me a simple question. Do you know why I still work at the dry cleaner? I assumed it was family obligation or extra income, but his answer surprised me. He said, "It keeps me connected to reality. It reminds me that behind every case number is a real person with real problems. It helps me see people as people, not abstractions." That perspective, so different from my own, really stayed with me. Amara nodded. You've mentioned in previous interviews that you now take public transportation regularly. Is that related? Victor smiled. Absolutely. It started as a deliberate exercise, almost a penance, but it evolved into something more meaningful. When you're insulated in private cars and executive elevators, you lose touch with how most people live. The subway, with its incredible diversity of humanity, keeps me grounded in a way my previous lifestyle never could. Not everyone believes your transformation is genuine, Amara noted. Some critics suggest it's just image rehabilitation after a public scandal. That's fair, Victor acknowledged. I can't control what others believe about my motives. All I can do is try to live consistently with the values I now espouse and let my actions speak for themselves. The skepticism is actually healthy. It keeps me honest. They continued talking for another hour, covering topics ranging from corporate governance reforms to Victor's reconciliation with his daughter Sophia, whose vision for the Maxwell Foundation he had once dismissed as naive idealism. As their interview concluded, Amara asked one final question. What advice would you give to today's business leaders about avoiding the mistakes you made? Victor considered this carefully. I'd say 3 things. First, create structures that force you to hear diverse perspectives, especially from those your decisions affect most directly. Second, never lose sight of the human impact of your business decisions. profits matter, but not at the expense of people's dignity and well-being. And third, remember that how you treat the person serving your coffee or cleaning your office says more about your character than how you treat your board members or investors. He smiled wryly. And if someone asks you to pay for damages you've caused, even if it's just $175 for a water-stained silk shirt, pay it promptly and with good grace. You never know who might end up judging you later. After Amara left, Victor remained on the bench, watching the flow of people through the park. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Don't forget dinner tonight with the Next Tech team to discuss expanding the program to Chicago. He texted back a confirmation, then noticed the time. If he hurried, he could make it to his regular afternoon commitment. 30 minutes later, Victor walked into a community center in the Bronx, where a group of teenagers were already setting up laptops and notebooks. This was the mentoring program he had established 4 years ago, working with high school students from the same neighborhoods where Judge Anthony Jackson had grown up. "Mr. Maxwell," called out Deshawn, a bright 17-year-old with ambitions of starting his own tech company. "I finished that business plan you helped me with. Can you look it over?" "Absolutely," Victor replied, settling in beside the young man. "Let's take a look." As he began reviewing Deshawn's work, offering suggestions and encouragement, Victor felt a sense of purpose that his former wealth and power had never provided. The transformation that had begun with a moment of humiliation in a courtroom had led him here, not to redemption exactly, but to something more meaningful, the opportunity to help others avoid his mistakes and to use his experience, both positive and negative, to create something of lasting value. Later that evening, as he sat at dinner with Sophia, Maria Roberts from Nextech, and their team discussing expansion plans for their educational initiative, Victor found himself reflecting on the strange, unpredictable path his life had taken. "You look thoughtful, Dad," Sophia observed during a lull in the conversation. "Just appreciating the irony," he replied quietly. 5 years ago, sitting across the table from Nextech would have meant tense legal negotiations. Now we're partners in something that's actually changing lives for the better. Maria Roberts, Nextech's CEO, overheard his comment and raised her glass. "To unexpected partnerships and second chances," she said, "and to costly lessons well learned," Victor added, touching his glass to hers. As the conversation continued around him, Victor's thoughts returned briefly to that day in the dry cleaner, when his arrogance and dismissiveness towards someone he perceived as unimportant had set in motion a chain of events that completely transformed his life. It had cost him his company and much of his fortune, but had given him something far more valuable, a chance to become a better version of himself. The final irony, perhaps, was that he wouldn't change a thing about how it had all unfolded, not even that water-stained silk shirt that had turned out to be the most expensive lesson of his life. The end.